Hi, my name is Jesse Anderson, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my latest project. You might remember me from the Million Monkeys project that I did a few months ago, and I've done a continuation of that project where I've used the Million Monkeys code to try and do some scalability, some performance testing, and some ROI testing on Amazon Web Services. So to introduce some of these terms, Amazon Web Services is a way to put some of your information on the web. And this video is really for people who are trying to figure out, is Amazon Web Services right for them? What kind of performance can they expect, and what kind of costs they can expect? So in order to run to get that data on the internet, Amazon has Elastic Cloud Compute, or EC2, that allows a virtual machine to be running on Amazon's servers in the cloud. That allows that EC2 instance to serve up web services, or in the case of the Million Monkeys, to run in an Elastic MapReduce cluster. An Elastic MapReduce cluster is Amazon's way to make it very simple and easy to create an enterprise level Hadoop cluster. And you can look up Hadoop later and try and find more information about that. And I also touched on some pricing. Amazon just introduced spot pricing for Elastic MapReduce. Spot pricing allows you to bid on the unused portion, or if there's not unused portions, if you outbid someone else who's using the spot instance already, you get their instances. So what that allows you to do is to really reduce the price of running something in the cloud. And we'll talk more about what level of price difference you can actually achieve using spot instances.